Hello, I'm Olivia Mattis. I'm so happy that you have devoted some of your Sunday today to joining us for what I think is going to be a very important program about a masterpiece of a film. We have the filmmaker Paula Apsell, who has made really one of the most important films out there about resistance and particularly Jewish resistance. And if you haven't yet had a chance to see it, you will have until tomorrow night at 10 p.m. to see the film. I also want to mention that we have this deck of cards that we've created on heroes of the Holocaust. And our queen of spades in this deck of cards is Vladka Meed, whose son is one of our speakers today. How exciting. And if we ever do another deck of cards or a similar project, I really hope that we will, or I plan, let's say, to include Bela Hazan, whose son is also with us here today. She is another great hero whose story you will hear about today and whose story you learned about also in the film. Our moderator today is Dr. Jud Newborn, that you've met on many of our programs. He is one of the world's experts on resistance during the Holocaust. He wrote a very important book on Sophie Scholl and the White Rose. He was the founding curator of the Museum of Jewish Heritage in New York. And I turn to him as often as I can. So Jud, please take it away.
Thank you very much, Olivia, and I'm always glad to be a moderator for the Sousa Mendes Foundation above all institutions. So everybody, greetings. We're here today for a moving and revelatory experience. You've presumably seen the new film by our special guest, the award-winning producer and director, Paula Apsell, Resistance They Fought Back. It's a groundbreaking, poignant, and inspiring documentary covering the various forms of Jewish resistance beyond anything that has been done so far in film. And I agree, it's a masterpiece. Focusing effectively on Eastern Europe and using the surprising new method of archaeology, among other kinds of documentation, Apsell tells the manifold, of Jewish resistance in the ghettos, in the forests, and in the death camps themselves against all odds. She shows also how they all overlap with Amidah, or Jewish spiritual self-assertion against the forces of systematic dehumanization and destruction. It is thereby a testimony to the undying spirit of the Jewish people and that of all humanity at our best. Our other two highly distinguished guests are the children of women who resisted as couriers between isolated ghettos, thereby telling the little-known stories of how these women risked and often lost their lives while serving in disguise as Christians. Now, here's a little more about our guests. Paula S. Apsell served for 35 years as the senior executive producer of over 650 PBS broadcasted Nova programs. That's the multi-award winning documentary series you all know that has set the standard for science programming. Paula herself has received numerous honors during her career. That includes a Peabody Award, the Carl Sagan Award, several honorary doctorates, and an Academy Award nomination for the IMAX film titled Special Effects. All these were capped by a Lifetime Achievement Emmy Award in 2018 as the first science journalist to be so honored. She is also a fellow of the American Association for the Advancement of Science, and she served on the boards of the Smithsonian Museum, among other institutions. Okay. We are also honored to have with us Professor Yoel Haari. He is the son of the Jewish resistance hero Bela Hazan, whose story is partly told in today's film, and we'll hear more. Professor Haari is on the medical faculty of the Hebrew University as the Henry and Erna Leir Professor for Research in Neurodegenerative Diseases. Since 2015, he has been investigating Holocaust-related topics, focusing on his mother and all Jewish women who served as couriers and those who were interned in Nazi camps. His new book, Portrait of a Woman, was recently published in Hebrew and already has rave reviews in English and has just been translated. Our other honored guest is Dr. Stephen D. Meed. Stephen is the son of Vladka and Benjamin Meed, the legendary Jewish resistance heroes and later activists in securing the memory of the Holocaust around the world, including serving as founders of the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington. Their son, Stephen, participated in this mission too, translating his mother's speeches from Yiddish. And Dr. Mead received his MD from New York University, along with postdoctoral training in rheumatology and pain management. Now in retirement, he is retranslating from the original Yiddish his mother's classic memoir, On Both Sides of the Wall, and should be available in February 2025. So, Paula, I now turn the floor over to you.
Thank you very much, Jud, and thank you, Olivia and Jud, for your very kind comments about my film, Resistance, They Fought Back. Since the end of World War II, almost 80 years ago, what we know as the Holocaust, the murder by Germans of some 6 million Jews, 2/3 of European Jewry, has been analyzed, studied, and scrutinized. You would think we would know everything there is to know about it, yet that doesn't seem to be the case. A professor who taught modern Jewish history in a college in New York City told me that every year, when she asks her students what they know about the Holocaust, the answer is the same. The Jews went to their deaths as sheep to the slaughter. We've all heard of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, probably the most well-known example of Jewish resistance during the war and the largest Jewish uprising against the Nazis. But paradoxically, many people believe it was the only uprising. So let's dig into this misunderstanding. Did the Jews resist the Nazis? And how widespread was Jewish resistance? I began to ask these questions while I was still working as executive producer of the PBS Nova Science series. In June 2016, I was on location in Vilnius, the capital of Lithuania, known as Vilna in Yiddish, the everyday language of most Eastern European Jews. As our cameras rolled, a group of archaeologists led by the late Professor Richard Freund, the inventor, one might say, of Holocaust archaeology, made a profoundly moving discovery. Their work proved the existence of an escape tunnel secretly dug by 80 Jewish prisoners in a forest called Ponari, a killing site where Germans and their Lithuanian collaborators murdered about 70,000 Jews and 30,000 others. On the last night of Passover in 1943, those 80 Jewish prisoners climbed into the tunnel to make their escape. Most of them were shot, but 12 of the prisoners survived, reaching the forest where Jewish partisans were waiting to save them. This turned into a documentary called Holocaust Escape Tunnel, which was broadcast nationally on Nova in 2017. Before working on it, I'd never heard of this tunnel dug by prisoners with spoons at Ponari, or of their heroic escape. I began to wonder what other examples of Jewish resistance there were that somehow had been left out of my Holocaust education. And so when I left Nova in 2019, I began a multi-year odyssey to understand the Holocaust through the lens of Jewish resistance and to make a feature documentary to refute the myth of Jewish passivity. In the summer and fall of 2021, right in the middle of COVID, my documentary crew from Lone Wolf Media, my co-director, Kirk Wolfinger, and I traveled to Poland, Latvia, Lithuania, Israel, and around the United States. There were some 1,200 ghettos in Eastern Europe, and we knew we wanted to show examples of Jewish resistance, not just in big cities like Warsaw, but also in smaller, less well-known places. One of the many experts we interviewed, Professor Michael Berenbaum, admonished one should never believe that Warsaw and Vilna were the only ghettos that rose. Ghettos large and small rose in resistance. Another important thing we learned from our research was that resistance came in many different forms. Much of it had nothing to do with guns and grenades. Most Jews didn't have weapons anyway. They resisted nonetheless, setting up soup kitchens, illegal schools, and documenting German war crimes, maintaining cultural activities and spiritual observance. This unarmed resistance, known as Amidah in Hebrew, turned out to be one of the most important forms of Jewish resistance, and describing it a unique aspect of my film. Called the Jerusalem of the North, the capital of Lithuania, Vilnius or Vilna, was renowned throughout the world for Jewish learning and culture. The Germans attacked Vilna in 1941, 2 years after invading Warsaw. They came late, but acted fast, forcing the city's large Jewish population into 2 crowded ghettos and setting up a site to kill Jews in Ponary Forest just outside the city. When a young Jewish rebel named Abba Kovner learned what was happening there, he wrote a manifesto calling upon the ghetto to resist. This represents the important evolution from Amidah, nonviolent resistance, to armed resistance. When the Germans destroyed the Vilna ghetto, Abba Kovner and his colleagues escaped through the sewage canals to the Rudniki Forest, where they set up a partisan unit called the Avengers, one of the few groups that allowed women to serve as fighters. Vladka Kempner, his life companion, was one of those fighters and the first person known to blow up a German transport train off its tracks with a bomb made by Abba. The forest was cold and there wasn't much food, but the Avengers were, by any standard, unusually effective, in unofficial numbers, killing more than 200 enemy soldiers, 180 miles of train tracks, 5 bridges, and 40 German train cars. In the forests of Europe, it's estimated that some 30,000 Jews fought as partisans, keeping German soldiers out and protecting Jews who had escaped from the ghettos and used the forests to hide. What I'm sure you've all noticed by now is how young the resistance leaders were, some still teenagers. And because a male's Jewish identity is so easily detectable, some young men had to stay hidden. So women were often recruited as couriers to go from ghetto to ghetto, smuggling food, weapons, and people, even babies. These couriers were essential to the resistance, and only now is their role coming to light. We are lucky to have Stephen Meed and Yoel Haari here to speak about their valiant mothers, Vladka Meed and Bela Hazan, whose stories, in small part, it was also my privilege to tell in my film. By the end of 1943 in Eastern Europe, millions of Jews have been murdered, and most of the Jews that remained alive have been forced into concentration camps. But even there, in those camps, they are resisting. We now know there were in all 7 death camp rebellions. 6 were led by Jews, 1 by Russian prisoners of war. So if you add these 6 rebellions and camps, or any act of disobedience, no matter how minor, was punishable by death, to the many acts of nonviolent resistance and uprisings against the Nazis in ghettos, to thousands of Jews fighting as partisans in the forest, to the countless escapes attempted and Jews rescuing Jews, how can we account for the myth that Jews went to their deaths as sheep to the slaughter? Is it at best a case of simply not knowing the history? Or is it an anti-Semitic slur, blaming the victims for their own deaths? Ironically, it can be traced back to the Nazis themselves, who kept extensive records of their war against the Jews, but failed to mention Jewish resistance, leading people to believe it never happened. No matter how many films we make, books we write, articles we publish, we can never begin to undo the damage of the Holocaust. We can only push back against the damage it continues to do, giving white supremacists and anti-Semites ammunition, however misguided, for their campaigns of hate. As Ilya Lenski, director of the Jews of Latvia Museum, says, so we have to understand that when we use this phrase, cattle to the slaughter, we use the Nazi lens. We look at Jews through Nazi eyes. It is tragic to think that 80 years after the Holocaust, we're still doing that. I hope that to some degree, my documentary, Resistance, They Fought Back, will help all of us, Jews and non-Jews alike, see this for the lie that it is.
Thank you very much, Olivia, for inviting me to this, and Jud for introducing me so kindly. Thank you, Paula, for your wonderful movie, and thank you, Matthew, for helping me in producing this presentation. What I will tell you now is based on the extensive memoirs of a young Jewish courier, Bela Hazan, my mother. She wrote them in December 1945, 1 month after she arrived in Palestine, and 6 months after her liberation. So the memories were very fresh in her mind when she was writing them. In the film Resistance, I describe how in October 1942, 20-year-old Bela, she was stationed in the Vilna ghetto at that time, was sent by the underground leaders on a mission to Grodno, a city between Vilna and Bialystok, which you can see on the map. Her main task was to inform members of the Dror youth movement, Dror meaning freedom, in Grodno about the slaughter of Jews in the Ponari forest, the killing ground of the Vilna Jews. She was also instructed to assist them in organizing armed resistance. Bela left for Grodno using a fake identity of a Polish woman, Bronislawa Limanowska, and she used this identity throughout the war years. In Grodno, Bela rented a room on the Aryan side of the ghetto, which served also as a safe place for other couriers traveling between Warsaw and Vilna. She found work as an interpreter in the Grodno Gestapo office, as she knew, besides Polish, some German, Russian, and Ukrainian. She risked her life stealing official German documents, stationery paper, and stamps. From these items, which she smuggled back to Vilna or to Bialystok ghettos, her comrades produced fake identity cards and travel permits for members of the Dror underground and for other members of the youth movement. On December 24, Bela was visited by 2 other couriers of Dror, 26-year-old Lonka Kozhibrodska, you can see her on the right of the photo, and Thelma Schneiderman on the left. And Bela is in between. They were en route to Vilna for a dangerous mission, and Bela joined them for that mission a week later. But in Grodno, a Gestapo officer who took a like at Bela invited them to a Christmas Eve party. They could not refuse to this invitation. The Gestapo officer photographed the 3 women and produced a beautiful picture of the 3. Each one got a copy of the photo. 1 copy survived the war and became the iconic image of the Jewish couriers. It is displayed in many Holocaust museums worldwide. I would now like to share with you the fate of 2 women in this picture, Lonka and Bela. In the spring of 1942, both women lived in the Dror kibbutz Tel Chai in Bialystok ghetto. From there, they would go out for their missions and return after their completion. In these missions, they would have to infiltrate in and out of ghettos and cross well-guarded borders. In early June, Lonka left on a mission to Warsaw. She was carrying 2 pistols, money, and letters. Carelessly, she also carried the photo of the 3 couriers. I should mention that Lonka also had an assumed Polish identity. Her name was Krystyna Kosowska. Midway to Warsaw, at the Malkinia train station, which you can see on the map, near Treblinka, Lonka was arrested by the Gestapo. She was taken to Gestapo headquarters in Warsaw. You can see the Malkinia train station on the left, and the next slide will show the headquarters in Warsaw of the Gestapo, where she was interrogated under torture for several days. You can see actually on the right side of the slide, up on the upper part, you can see an investigation room of the Gestapo, and there's a cupboard on the left which has all kinds of instruments to squeeze out and confessions out of the detainees. She didn't reveal any information about the underground or the identity of the women in the picture, which the Gestapo found in her coat. The Gestapo didn't realize she was Jewish. They suspected her to be a member of the Polish resistance, Armia Krajowa. After several days of brutal interrogation, Lonka was sent to the notorious Pawiak prison in Warsaw, which you can see on the slide. The building is on the left, and then you can see the execution of prisoners within the wall of the prison, or the execution of hostages, or which were taken among the prisoners in retaliation for any act that was done against German police or German soldiers. Since Lonka did not return to Bialystok, her comrades back in Bialystok became concerned about her fate, and Bela volunteered to search for her and traveled to Warsaw. She also was tasked with delivering guns, and a Hebrew bulletin was hidden in her braids. En route to Warsaw, she too was arrested on the train in Malkinia. The Gestapo identified her from the picture of the three women they had confiscated from Lonka. Bela managed to get rid of the Hebrew bulletin before it was discovered. Lucky for her, because otherwise they would know she's Jewish and would kill her on the spot. But they disclosed the guns, and she too underwent several days of torture at Gestapo headquarters without revealing her secrets. The Gestapo considered her also a member of the Polish resistance. Bela was then sent to Pawiak, and after 6 weeks of isolation in a dark bunker, she was moved to a prisoner's cell, and there she met Lonka. And from then on, they remained together. After 5 months of harsh imprisonment in Pawiak, both women were sent to Auschwitz, and you can see the mugshots made upon arrival to Birkenau. They lived in the women's camp in Birkenau and were forced into hard labor outside the camp. The SS guards, with their vicious dogs, the German female supervisors, and the female capos abused the women brutally and sadistically. And you can see this in the cartoon or in the drawing made by Auschwitz survivor Nomi Jutkowski. At the end of each working day, the women had to carry wounded and dead comrades back to the camp. Typhus epidemics claimed hundreds of lives in Birkenau daily. In March 1943, both Lonka and Bela contracted typhus. As Polish inmates, they were taken to the infirmary and not to the gas chamber. Bela recovered and was permitted to stay in the infirmary working as a nurse, and this allowed her to take care of Lonka and hide her during selections which were routinely performed by the SS doctor. Lonka's condition deteriorated, and she died in Bela's arms. Her last words to Bela were, "You will tell our story." When Lonka died, Polish friends placed an icon of Jesus on her chest and prayed the Catholic prayers for the dead. When women died in the infirmary, as in other residential blocks, the common practice was to drag them by hand or leg and throw them into a pile of bodies outside the block where rats would feed on them. At night, a truck would collect the corpses, taking them to the crematorium. Bela didn't want Lonka's body to be desecrated in this way. She also didn't want that she would leave this world as a Catholic. She asked the SS doctor for permission to carry Lonka's body by herself to the morgue near the crematorium. This was a bold act for which she could be punished severely. First, the SS doctor refused. He said, all bodies are the same. Why should she be treated differently? But Bela managed to persuade him. Together with Polish friends, Bela carried Lonka's body on a stretcher to the morgue. It was like a funeral procession, an unheard of occurrence in Birkenau. In the morgue, they lowered the body of Lonka. The other Polish women left, and Bela stayed alone with her friend. The first thing she did was to remove the icon of Jesus and throw it away. And then she remained with Lonka for a long hour, speaking to her and singing Hebrew melodies that they both loved and used to sing together in the draw gatherings. Eventually, Bela recited Kaddish over Lonka and returned to the camp. In this way, Bela felt that her beloved friend left the world as a Jew. For the rest of her life, the memory of Lonka and her testament accompanied her. You will tell about us. And now I've taken the mission to do so. For their actions in saving Jews, which I had no time to talk about, I will need several meetings for that, both Lonka and Bela received posthumously certificates of appreciation from the World Bnei Brit organization, which commemorates Jews who rescued Jews. You can see those citations in the slide. In 2018, I visited Auschwitz and Birkenau, not for the first time. The Auschwitz-Birkenau Museum had given me a framed picture of Lonka with her assumed Polish name, Krystyna Kosowska, which you can see in the middle of the slide. I went to Birkenau to the crematorium where the body of Lonka was burned, crematorium number 2. I positioned the picture on the ruins of the crematorium where she was incinerated. And then 75 years after my mother had done so, I also recited the Kaddish in Lonka's memory. And the last slide, you can see Bela at an older age, and thank you very much. And now I would like to turn the floor to my friend Stephen.
Thank you, Yoel. In the interest of trying to squeeze a lot into a smaller amount of time so that we have some more time for questions, I may have to skip over a few of the slides. So if things look awkward, just forgive and stick around for the ride. First, I'd like to express also my deep appreciation first to Paula Apsell and the creation of an extraordinary piece of work that has so much truth to it, so much pain, and yet greatness or glory or whatever is the right word. I'm not good at this. And I'm so grateful that you did create that film. And I also wish that it becomes something that is seen throughout the world.
Thank you. Thank you, Steve.
And I'd also like to thank Susan Mendes Foundation, because it's for me a bit of an introduction myself, and I am grateful for the work that they are doing and the honoring of somebody as great who provided support and visas to thousands of Jews. It was important. My talk, I was thinking of focusing on what is a what is a career because the word always troubled me. I was not sure. It sounded like something that's just a higher step over from being a postal worker. And that has nothing to do with what the truth was for couriers. Couriers probably all were chosen, and I checked. Courier is the Yiddish word for courier that is used. There is a Hebrew word as well, mishulach, but courier expresses better somebody who is a connection, somebody who carries or does something that transmits from one place to another. In other words, the important thing about couriers is how widespread was the effect or the benefit of what they were doing. Vladka was Fege Peltel Mendzhevsky. Vladka was only one of her early names that she acquired when she needed an alternative, but it stuck. So that throughout the war, she was known much more by the one name Vladka than either by her own name or by any of the other aliases. And after the war, she decided that really is my name and has maintained it ever since. As a young woman in Warsaw, she was part of the original resistance fighters, initially inside the ghetto, and then she was sent out of the ghetto across the wall or through the wall and over to work on the Aryan side, her job being to find supplies, weapons, hiding places, and just about anything else that could possibly be used to help, one, save the Jewish people, and two, supply the people in the ghetto who were going to be doing the armed resistance. It was important for a courier that they blend in, so that's why it became mostly a group of young Jewish women, largely in their late teens and early 20s, who, because of their appearance and attractiveness and excellent command of Polish, would not be suspected of being Jewish and thus could do clandestine work, fading in, being absorbed into a large group, and at some level not being noticed. Next slide. She was born in Warsaw in January 29, 1921, the oldest of three children of Shlomo and Hannah Peltel. Her family was a lower middle class urban Jewish family, very close knit, very traditional. They observed the Sabbath, but they were not really that religious. The children spoke Yiddish at home with their parents, but Polish among themselves. When the Germans invaded Poland in 1939, Vladka, let's call her Vladka from here forward, was still only 17. She had striking features, fair hair, blue eyes. Unlike most of the Jews in the ghetto, she was able to speak that perfect Polish with no accent, and she soon learned to use that to her own advantage and the advantage of her family. Jews in Poland were subjected to humiliation and beatings by the brutal German occupiers. They often suffered abuse and discrimination at the hands of their Polish neighbors. Vladka's own father had been brutally beaten by the Germans at the beginning of the war and never fully recovered and died about a year into the time of the ghetto. But Vladka could convincingly pretend to be Jewish. I'm sorry, to be Polish. She could go to the wealthier non-Jewish neighborhoods and trade household items for food with the locals, and nobody there would think that she was anything other than just another Polish shopgirl. When in 1939 the Jews were forced to wear armbands with a Jewish star, Vladka dared to take hers off as soon as she left the ghetto area and would do whatever was necessary to provide for her family. At the time, Warsaw was a home for the largest Jewish population of any city in Europe, nearly 400,000. German occupiers decreed that all Jews from Warsaw must live locked behind a 10-foot wall that would enclose an area of about a square mile in the center of Warsaw. That was the Warsaw Ghetto. Buildings were the oldest, most run down, and after 400,000 Jews were forced into an area that normally held only 100,000, there was horrific overcrowding, especially when even more Jews were brought in from the outside outlying villages and towns and squeezed into the same area. By 1941, there were 440,000 Jews living isolated behind the ghetto walls, no communication to the outside world, living 6 or 7 people to a room, living several families to every apartment, living in a world where they were constantly being assaulted by disease, malnutrition. The ghetto was planned by the Nazis to be a place that hastened people's deaths because of disease or pestilence or starvation. And that was also the plan for the some 1,000 other smaller ghettos that were across Poland. Vladka had been involved in youth groups even before the war. Her family were socialists, members of the Jewish Labor Bund, and she had been sent to Bund schools that emphasized Yiddish language and to socialist summer camps. In the summer camps, there was significant amounts of indoctrination, idealism. It wasn't the Zionist groups, but it was the same idea. This became your group of comrades, and together you had a goal. And the goal was to do things to save Jewish lives and Jewish people. With the advent of the Nazi invasion, these organizations took on an even greater significance. After the Jewish schools were closed by the Germans, the young people defiantly continued their education, gathering secretly to listen to lectures, to read literature, hold seminars. They created children's corners and gave lectures to adults as well. They were participating in what was that form of resistance that was just spoken of by Paula, the concept of Amidah, is standing up to defend your own ability and your people, and to express your own traditions, to remain humane in the face of people who would want to reduce you to just animals. Vladka describes one of these adult literary sessions that she ran in a secret room in one of the tenements. I remember that the atmosphere had a sense of uplift. In the ghetto with so much misery and so much hunger, we were talking about literature. And even I, as a young person, could command their attention and bring some hope and beauty and poetry to their lives. That felt worth it. That felt that it was part of the struggle. Vladka drew most of her inspiration from her mother's example, who sacrificed so much to try to enable her family to survive, going without her own portion of food so that her children would have more to eat, selling what few items there were in the ghetto. Few items there were in the apartment, whether it be furniture, bed, linens, or whatever, so that there might be something to trade for more food. She hid her own portion of the meager loaf of bread that they had so that she would have something to give to the Melamed who was going to prepare her son, Chaim, for his bar mitzvah. Unfortunately, an event that never came to be. Next slide. Conditions were terrible. Death was everywhere. But most Jewish ghetto residents were still unaware that the German plan was full murder, full genocide, to completely empty the Polish lands and the surrounding lands of any Jews. At the time, most Jews still believed that the Germans could not possibly be speaking about more, and believed their lies that a work permit would save the life of a family, so they struggled for work permits. Lies about the trains lining up just outside the ghetto walls at a railroad siding named the Umschlagplatz. Trains that would eventually transport families in the German provinces east to better jobs, but in truth, were only taking them as far as Treblinka. They were unaware or could not believe in the terrible truth of the gas chambers of Treblinka. Next slide. In the summer of 1942, the Germans began to deport Jews from Warsaw to the trains by the thousands, then by the 10,000s, and eventually by the hundreds of thousands. Vladka's mother, sister, and brother were all swept away in this tidal phase. Vladka herself was tapped by her comrades to become an active member of the resistance. She became a courier, which was a group of incredibly brave young women who, like Vladka, looked Aryan, spoke fluently, had nerves of steel, were able to operate undercover in an ever hostile world and do whatever was necessary to help the cause of resistance. The courier's task was doubly difficult because not only did they have to blend in with the Aryan crowds outside of the ghetto and not trigger suspicion, not from the Nazis, but most importantly, not from their own Polish neighbors, many of whom were avidly trying at the same time to make Poland free of Jews and were aggressively looking for anybody who may be hiding as a Jew on the Aryan side and reporting that person to the German authorities, or just trying to be able to take a great deal of money from them and blackmail them continuously into not being taken to the Nazis. In the one meeting that Bega was invited by Abrasha Blum, the leader of the resistance forces for the Bund, not surprisingly, she was the only woman in the room. The main directive was to coordinate the surviving forces from among the Jews that were still in the ghetto. By then, there were only about 35,000 people left out of the original 400 some odd thousand that were there at the beginning of the deportations. In Abrasha's remarks, he would go on, "We have pitifully few weapons and little cooperation from our Aryan comrades. The odds are that we will all die. But even to die, we must learn how. We have to die with purpose, with pride, and with dignity." After the meeting, all the other members left on their assignments. Only Vladka had been assigned no task. Abrasha took Vladka aside. "Bega," he said, "you need to become a courier because you can help blend in with the Polish Christians. Your Polish and mannerisms are so good. You can keep your head. People will not notice you, but will trust you. You can make contacts with others outside the ghetto, members of the Polish resistance and others. There's nearly no arms in the ghetto. We will need you to find sources of arms and explosives and ammunition and find your own way to smuggle these back into the ghetto. If we need you to scour the outside to find hiding places for women and children, particularly those in the ghetto, and find a way to smuggle them out. Just as Yoel's mother had the same responsibility, so did Vladka. Even after the Warsaw Ghetto uprising, there were still scattered some 30,000 Jews somewhere in the Warsaw area. They were not abandoned. That what became, for the couriers, their biggest job, maintaining a lifeline to them, maintaining a lifeline to those who were in the forests, maintaining a lifeline to those who were in other towns, cities, villages, in labor camps. And there were also not many, but there was any number of children, some orphaned, some not, that it was the couriers, such as Vladka, who had to keep them alive for the entire war, and did. I could go on also for another 4 hours with all the events and times, but let me stop here and leave this open for questions for the audience. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Stephen and Yoel and Paula and Jud. We will get to questions in a little while. Now is the time for you, our beloved audience, to continue putting those questions in. I see that there are already quite a few. I'm just going to make some very brief announcements and then we'll get to your questions. So in the month of September, we have 3 programs upcoming on September 15th, the 22nd, and the 29th, all Sundays, as we normally do. So the 15th, we are introducing you to the Aristides de Sousa Mendes Museum, which has just opened in Portugal. I was in Portugal a few weeks ago for the grand opening of this brand new museum devoted to our hero and his story. It's in his house in the center of Portugal. So we're going to take you on a tour of the house, and that's a free program. And I hope you'll sign up and tell all your friends. 1 week later, we have a book program, which is about a book called Max's War. It's a novel about a Ritchie boy. We recently did a program about the story of the Ritchie boys. And so this is a follow-up to that program. It's also free. And then September 29th, we are turning our attention to the very important story of the kinder transports, those children from Austria and Czechoslovakia and Germany who were sent to the United Kingdom for safety. And it's an incredible film that we're showing. It's called My Knees Were Jumping, Memories of the Kinder Transports, and it's by Melissa Hacker. It's a very interesting film in that it's not telling really the history of the kinder transport movement, but rather the psychology of what it was like for these children and then the transmission of memory to the next generation. So that's a very tender and beautiful film that you will not want to miss. We're just going to show you a little trailer now of that film.
In the 9 months leading up to World War II, nearly 10,000 children from Nazi Germany, Austria, Czechoslovakia, and Poland were sent to safety in England. My mother was one of these children.
The day he was brought back, there were 2 men with him. And I heard the second man calling up and in effect saying, "Shall we take him in again?" And I knew instinctively if he ever were taken back again, he'd never come out. And I think it was that which made my parents decide to send me away.
All of us, including the children, had a very clear sense of absolute danger, of the malice of the world around us.
I thought, this was an adventure and I would go and my parents would follow. It was no big deal. And that's how we went into this. A little afraid, but sort of also feeling that it was an adventure. We were going to something better. Remember?
Okay, so that's a little preview of what we have in September. And now let's get to your questions. So Jud, please take it away.
Okay. I've been scouring for questions, and you should also keep posting. Let's see. Paula, why was Eastern Europe featured in the film, and will there be another film about Western Europe?
So I really wish there could be another film about other places in Europe. The emphasis in Resistance They Fought Back was really on Poland, Latvia, and Lithuania. I mean, there was reason to focus on Western Europe because that was where so many Jews lived and where so many Jews resisted and where so many Jews were killed. So there was a certain reason for that. But the other issue was resources. And in making a good film, if you make a film about everything, you're going to wind up making a film about nothing. And this film was as full as it could be without risking going overboard and being about too much. I'm instinctively, as a filmmaker, kind of opposed to making survey films, but I felt it was very important in this case because so few people know the story of Jewish resistance that I felt that it was very important to tell the whole story, starting with Amidah, nonviolent resistance, going into the forest to the partisans, and then going into the death camps, which of course, I mean, I certainly didn't know that there were 7 death camp rebellions, 6 of which were led by Jews. So I felt it was really important to speak about that evolution of resistance. But if we had gone to geographically more places where the forms of resistance were certainly different, I mean, there were certainly many Jews in the French resistance, I think that the film would have turned into a jumble. So that was why I made that decision.
I think you're very right. And I think focusing on Eastern Europe made a great deal of sense because there everything happened in every kind of Jewish resistance. So I think you did what had to be done in order to tell the story in the moving and powerful way it is told.
And I'll tell you, Jud, that even as it is, so much went on the cutting room floor that it's really very sad. And if people want to see other clips, they should go to the website theyfoughtback.com because we have, I think, about 12 clips of really important forms of resistance and events that we couldn't fit into the film.
I'm continuing to look for questions, and I see a new one. Linda asks, who was taking all the films of the Jews during the war, not the Nazi propaganda films of Warsaw, and how were they preserved? So are there any clips that were taken by others other than the Nazis that one could turn to?
Yes, they are, but they're really few and far between. It is amazing how much of this material was actually taken by the Nazis.
Yes.
And was propaganda. And we, in general, marked that if it was necessary to do so, to explain that to people. We did get some other footage, and we got footage from other sources other than the German government.
Well, one of the great sources of photographs by a Jew is by a woman who was a partisan, and she rescued her camera and served as a photographer. And now, why is her name passed?
Faye Schulman.
Faye Schulman, right, Faye Schulman. So you can certainly Google Faye Schulman and the Jewish Partisans Foundation to see her pictures. And we have a program on her, actually, with the Susa Mendes Foundation. Someone asks, someone thinks, one of our audience members, that there should be a companion book to this film. Paula, will there be? Anything
Well,
recommend?
in point of fact, actually, I have a writing partner, David Chanoff, who's a faculty member at Brandeis. And so we actually have an offer from the University of Toronto Press. So we'll see how much strength and energy we have to do this. But I agree that there needs to be, first of all, a trade book that is the kind of book that people will read, not necessarily. I mean, there are many scholarly books that include resistance. I don't want anybody to think that I did much original research, because I didn't. I'm not a scholar and I'm not a historian. So there are scholarly books, perhaps not fully on resistance, but we feel that, David and I feel that there needs to be one that the average person can read, and that also can be used to create new Holocaust courses. Because, I mean, I've taken many Holocaust courses in my life, and I find that so much of the focus is on Jewish victimhood, which of course is extremely important. But there also needs to be more on Jewish resistance, because that's a story that few people know, or too few people know.
Absolutely. And it also breaks stereotypes about Jews that some people
Yes.
have about passivity in general.
Yes, I
And
can't
so,
tell you how many people have said to me afterwards, they've come up to me and said very kind of secretively, thank you so much. It always made me so mad, this idea that Jews went to their deaths like sheep to the slaughter. And now I see this isn't true. And, you know, the stories of the women, you know, the stories that Steve has told and Yoel have told, and many more, it's just, you know, it fills you with pride to see what these young women did. And when I show the film to young people, they're astonished that people who are barely out of adolescence could have taken this upon themselves to save the Jews in their community. It is amazing, and people should know it, whether they're Jews or not.
Someone asked, and I just want to clarify, the third woman in the photo with Bela Hazan, I believe what happened to her, and I believe it's in the film, and I believe she was murdered, and then the other two women went in search of her, and that's how they got caught, correct?
Can I
Yeah.
since it's my job to tell about them, and I've researched this picture for many years. The third woman in the film, in the photo of the three couriers, is Tema Schneiderman, and her Polish alias was Wanda Majewska, and she was after Bela and Lonka died or disappeared, captured by the Gestapo, she was the only courier of Dror between Warsaw and Vilna. Later on, some other women joined. And on the 11th of January 1943, she was sent by the leadership of Bialystok Jewish underground. She was sent also to Warsaw, and she took the same route that Bela and Lonka did, which she knew she may be captured on the way. And she carried various documents, information about the extermination of Jews, which was she had to transmit it to a contact person in Warsaw, and he would transmit it to the government in exile, the Polish government in exile, and she had a recipe for making in fire bombs from light bulbs, and she had other stuff in her suitcase. But she did manage to cross the Malkinia train station safely, and she went into the ghetto, into Warsaw ghetto, and then this was 11th of January, and she finished she performed all her tasks, and then on the 18th of January 1943, the Germans and their auxiliaries invaded the ghetto, and they wanted to deport 5,000 Jews, and there was a rebellion, both by Hashomer HaTzair and Dror, and this is called the Little Rebellion compared to the big Warsaw Ghetto uprising. So the Little Uprising, or January Uprising, and she was captured during that uprising, taken to the Umschlagplatz, and nobody knows how she really died. Whether, if you look in the books, it says she died in Treblinka, and I doubt that. There's no evidence for that. And Tema Tema, she knew what Treblinka is, and I'm sure that she tried to avoid going on the train, or perhaps she jumped from the train because other people that were taken on that train jumped and went back to Warsaw Ghetto. So how she died, it's not known, but she disappeared on the 18th of January.
So we are a little bit over the hour. I'm asking the audience if they would mind staying a little bit longer, but I would like to turn to the final remarks of our speaker. So Paula, what would you like to say in closing to our audience?
Well, first of all, thank you all very much for watching the film and for attending this webinar. My original goal, and the goal that stayed with me throughout, has been that as many people as possible would see resistance they fought back, not just because it's my film, and when you make a film, you want people to see it, but much more because the story of Jewish resistance is so important. And one film can give rise to others, and it can give rise to books. I cannot wait until Yoel Haari's book about his mother, A Portrait of a Woman, is published in English, because I want to read it, and I think it will be a bestseller. But because it's amazing that 80 years after the Holocaust, our knowledge of it is still not complete and not even accurate. And it is crucial that people understand the story of Jewish resistance during the Holocaust. If people want to know more, or if educators who are out there want to show the film or parts of the film to their students, please go onto the website, www.theyfoughtback.com. Very simple. There's a place where you can send me an email, or you can, I'm sure, write to Olivia, and Olivia will send it to me. I really enjoy hearing from you. And if anyone wants to see the film or wants to tell me other places where it can be shown, in JCCs, synagogues, churches, other community organizations, I'd be very grateful.
Great. Yoel, how about you?
Thank you. When I saw in the chat that someone just asked whether my mother spoke about her experiences, and I should say that almost not. I mean, when she wrote her memoirs in 1945, she wanted to put everything behind her and start a new life. And this is why she read, and really she wrote for the whole month, 3 notebooks with full of details about what happened. And I grew up, I never knew about these diaries until 1990, when somebody discovered them in a box in the cellar of Beit Lochamei Ghetto. And then I read them, and I was, of course, shocked. But at that time, I was busy with raising a family and career and so on. I really didn't dwell into them. Only later, in 2015, something happened, a dramatic event. But for this, you have to read the book. I don't want to make a spoiler. And then I began researching her memoirs. And this is the book. My book is the product of that research. And only then did I learn about how courageous, how unbelievably dedicated she was. I want to make one comment, if I may, 1 minute. These couriers, these young women who had an Aryan appearance, who had fake documents, they could have survived in the Aryan side of the ghetto without taking risks every day. I mean, there were many people, many Jews who had false identities who survived. But why did they have to do what they did? I mean, what was the motivation? And I think it's the education that they received in the youth movements that gave them this drive to try and work for others, save others, risk their lives for this idea of uniting, of being Zionist, or even non-Zionist, like Vladka. She was at that time at least not Zionist, but still they had a drive for companionship, for comradeship, and this is what pushed them to risk their lives every day. Thank you.
Thank you, Yoel. How about you, Stephen? What would you like to say in closing?
In closing, I would first echo what Yoel just said, that what you need is you need, first of all, exposure. You need to have as many sources of the story, of the information out there. It can't be one or two isolated works. So my project, Yoel's project, is to get more people to encounter the story of, for example, his mother, my mother, because it's both inspirational, but it's also informative. It gives you a very different view about what was resistance, what was constituted resistance, how hard resistance was if you only think in terms of the classic, you take a gun or something, or a Molotov cocktail. And that is it. And the final part is to just have a deep respect, both for the Kedoshim who perished, and for those who survived but were forever changed, and to understand that their rebuilding a life afterwards was also a form of resistance.
Thanks, Stephen. Jud, the last word goes to you.
Well, thank you. Thanks to everybody. I am so moved by Vladka Mead's emphasis on spiritual resistance and by the last words of Vladka to Bela in the Auschwitz infirmary: "You will tell our story." The fact is, Jews have always needed to reclaim their own stories for history, and this is especially true for the Holocaust. That history has always been a struggle for truth against distortions, sometimes based on stereotypes, denial, or even out of pure neglect. The story of Jewish resistance in particular was often ignored, but as Paula Apsell's film shows us, the remarkable details of that story are still being uncovered today, as it must be, because it is a testament to the Jewish spirit, but also a testament to humanity itself when we are all at our very best. And those are my last thoughts.
Fantastic. What a moving hour and 10 minutes. I appreciate everything our speakers had to say today, and of course, Paula's glorious film, and what heroes your mothers were, Yoel and Stephen. And thanks for opening yourselves up to us and sharing their really important stories with our audience. Audience, if you like what you do and if you like what we do, you think it's important, there is a donate button on the message that you will get after today's program. Please support our work. Thank you for coming. See you all in September. Be well, everybody. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Be well. Take care. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.